Hello? Hello? Good evening. Please join me for a Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. I call the meeting to order. Now's the time to test voting devices and to declare a quorum. I also have a few announcements. When standing at the mic, please stand on the mat that is on your side of the mic. Adjust the mic so that your voice is aimed at it, and you'll speak about 6 inches from the mic. Also, I've been advised that it would be in everyone's best interest to clean up your area when you are done and leaving the meeting, so that we don't have to clean up later. The fire exits are located on both sides of the hall and at the entrance when you first came in. I'd also like to say for the record that I have checked the service on the warrant, and it has been properly served. So we're legal in that regard. If you must leave the meeting early, kindly drop off your electronic voting devices with the checkers. And if you can, silence cell phones and electronic devices. We do not have a quorum. Has everyone voted? Well, okay. If you haven't voted, we need to know how many of you are there. So please vote. Are some of them not working? Okay. How many are not working? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 doesn't. Okay. So, Ted, what should they do? We're going to do the quorum again, and then those people whose votes are not being cast, are not being shown. If you stand, we'll take a count of those individuals, and I think we're going to be okay. Okay. 111 of you have checked in, so I'm not sure why we're not getting the number that we need. Okay, now that everyone has voted, we do have a quorum. I would like to welcome all the town meeting reps to tonight's meeting. As has been our practice, we have 2 screens so that all reps may read the articles and any amendments upon which you will be voting. Speaking of amendments, all amendments will be submitted on the forms which you can get from either the town clerk or me. This form will create an original and 3 copies, so press hard. I retain the white copy, yellow copy goes to the amendment assistant, the pink copy goes to the town clerk, and you retain the orange copy for your records. Here are the rules with respect to town meeting protocol and procedure. All questions and debate shall emanate from the microphone facing the moderator at the center of the hall and shall go through the moderator. Board or committee members, other town officials, or department heads may use other microphones to answer questions or provide information to the meeting. Speakers shall refrain from asking rhetorical or argumentative questions and shall only ask questions seeking needed information. The question should be in the who, what, when, where, and why mode. Kindly avoid questions that start or end with, isn't it true, or wouldn't you admit? I prefer not to have to rule questions out of order, but I am bound by the laws and regulations that define our conduct, and I will do my best to enforce them fairly and respectfully. I will allow a reasonable amount of time for follow-up questions, but I will have to intervene if any individual is asking an excessive number of such follow-up questions. All presenters of articles shall be limited to 10 minutes. If there are any that require additional time, advise me in advance, and if I deem it necessary, I will grant additional time. I shall notify each presenter and speaker when there is 1 minute remaining. With respect to discussion, speakers are encouraged to be brief, and each speaker will be limited to 3 minutes of debate. You should be able to make your points within 3 minutes. If you truly believe that this is not enough time for you to make your arguments, kindly advise me in advance, and I may allow some leeway. Speakers should ask their questions prior to engaging in discussion. Making inquiries will not be considered part of the 3-minute discussion limit unless you have started discussion and then ask questions. Once the clock starts, it will not stop until the speaker does or until time expires. I would appreciate being advised at the time that a speaker is beginning discussion. We do have some other rules of protocol. Please do not refer to any prior speaker by name. The proper designation is to call him or her the previous speaker. Please refrain from personal attacks. Challenging or arguing in opposition to another's position is fair game and is what this meeting is all about. Intentional slander against any individual or group cannot be tolerated. Let us refrain from repeating arguments that have already been made, but new ideas or distinctions are welcome and encouraged. Discussion of pending litigation will not be permitted unless specifically included in the warrant article being debated. If, during the course of discussion, I observe several speakers on one side of an issue but none in opposition, I will interrupt debate to inquire if there are any who wish to express the opposing position or offer an amendment. If there are none, I shall end debate and move the question. If there is opposition, I will move that party to the front of the line and allow debate to continue. I trust that you will appreciate how this will advance our mutual goal of moving town meeting along. To those who may be next in line, should I ever have to exercise this process, you have my apologies in advance. There will not be any debating from the presenter's podium. They may answer questions, but should they want to engage in a debate, presenters would have to queue up in line like everyone else. A person should not speak a second time until everyone has had an opportunity to speak, unless the previous speaker wishes to correct or dispute a statement of fact made by a previous speaker. This privilege will be narrowly construed by the moderator. Transparency and effective governance are the two goals of town meeting. To expedite our town meetings without affecting transparency, we have successfully employed a process called consent agenda. A consent agenda allows representatives to bundle several routine warrant articles into one so that instead of taking several separate votes on these essential bookkeeping articles, we take one vote on all of them. The town manager and I have discussed the type of articles that would be conducive to this process. These are articles that generally do not involve any questions or debate and are passed in the normal course of town business. At the appropriate time, I shall request a motion that the body vote to approve the consent agenda. This still allows for amendments, questions and answers, and discussions with the opportunity to add or delete consent agenda articles as town meeting deems best. The articles that I am suggesting for the consent agenda are Articles 2 through 9, 16, and 25. Thank you. We also now have the chairperson of the Select Board who will be making some recognition certificates for town meeting reps who have served 10 years.
Yes. Thank you. On behalf of the Select Board, the town, and this legislative body, I want to thank 3 people tonight for their service and present certificates recognizing those 10 years. First up is Deirdre Connolly. Is Deirdre here? No? Okay. Second, we have Rebecca Gore. Is Rebecca here? Come on up, Rebecca. And our third one is Donna Reddy. Thank you again for your service to the town.
All set?
Yes, Mr. Manager.
Thank you. Good evening, Paul Cohen, Town Manager. Article 1 is the customary article at spring and fall annual town meeting. It's to hear reports of the town officers and committees. And just have two items under this matter as overview for tonight's meeting. First, our Finance Director, John Souza, is going to provide a 5-year financial forecast in accordance with the town charter and bylaws. And then I'll provide a brief financial overview of the expenditure free cash for the upcoming meeting. So with that, I'll turn over to John Souza, our Finance Director.
Thank you, Town Manager Cohen. Good evening, everyone. Tonight, I'd like to provide you with some of the highlights of our 5-year financial forecast. We'll be taking a look at a summary of our revenue sources, expenditure trends, and then at the overall forecast. So we'll start with revenue. Under revenue, looking ahead for the coming year, our largest source continues to be local property taxes, and we start with our levy base of $114.6 million. Add the 2.5% increase allowed, add estimated new growth of $1.7 million, and then $1.63 million for excluded debt, and that gives us a total of $120.86 million that can be raised as our maximum levy. Going along to the next slide, we'll take a look at state aid, and that's our second largest revenue source. For the coming year, we're estimating that Chapter 70 aid will increase $150,000, which is about a 1.3% increase. That's based on roughly $30 per student. And we're also estimating that general municipal aid will increase by 3%. That will give us another $171,000 for increase up to $5.9 million. So state aid remains uncertain at this point. However, we're not anticipating any significant increases in state aid. That could be subject to change. Next, we look at available funds, and that's a sort of a collection of various reimbursements from revolving and special purpose funds. It includes the annual contribution from the school child care fund for the cost of school employee health insurance that work in that area. It also includes the annual $2.3 million transfer from the Sewer Capital Construction Fund, which is part of our long-term plan to finance sewer debt service costs. Then moving along to local receipts, motor vehicle excise taxes account for about 50% of this category, and we're estimating that motor vehicle excise taxes will increase $250,000 for the coming year. And we're looking at an increase for if we bring all of those categories that I just mentioned together, total revenue is expected to be $154.8 million in fiscal year 24. Now we'll move on to expenditures. For general government personnel, the forecast includes step increases for eligible personnel and a 2.5% cost of living allowance. General government expenses are anticipated to be increasing 2% unless otherwise noted. There are some exceptions. We'll look at those. And then after consulting with school administration, the projected increase for the Chelmsford Public Schools is $3.2 million. Our Neshoba Valley Tech assessment is projected to be $350,000 higher next year. That's about a 5% increase. And then next we move on to debt service. So from prior years, you probably remember that debt service includes 3 categories: excluded, non-excluded, and betterment funded. As we know, excluded debt is used to finance projects wherever voters have approved a Proposition 2.5 debt exclusion. I'm going to go on to the chart that we have, because it's a little easy to illustrate everything for you, since you have this in your handout. And you'll see that excluded debt service is shown in red. It's currently just over $2 million this fiscal year. It's going to decline $446,000 in the coming year, eventually declining down to $273,000 by fiscal year 26. The good news is that it will be completely paid off in fiscal year 2030, and that's why you see it fade away as you get out further in the chart. Non-excluded debt service is currently $7.14 million this fiscal year. Next year, it's going to decline slightly to just be just over $7 million. Projected debt service in this chart assumes that we will continue to borrow $3.8 to $4 million annually for our capital improvement program. Betterment funded debt is shown in yellow on the graph, and as the name implies, this is debt service for all the sewer projects that are financed after 2005. This is going to remain around $2.3 million for the next 3 fiscal years, and then it will decline to about $1.6 million in fiscal year 27. Then we move on to employee benefits. Our Middlesex County retirement assessment for fiscal year 24 increases $795,000 to $11.33 million. I wanted to mention that this assessment is based on the most recent actuarial valuation that Middlesex County Retirement System had performed this past January, as of that date, January 1st. And their most recent actuarial analysis projects that the system will be fully funded in fiscal year 36, which is 1 year earlier than the prior valuation report. Our health insurance budget for active employees includes an estimated 8% increase, or that's about $878,000. This is based on guidance from our insurer, and it's really a result of, that is a significant increase. It's a result of increasing costs for medical services and also higher utilization rates. Now that we're in the post-pandemic period, people are going to doctors more, they're making up for those the medical appointments that were lost and medical procedures that were postponed. The health insurance budget for retirees is estimated to increase 6% to $3.3 million for the coming fiscal year. So when we pull all of those expenditure categories together, you can see that the total is $156.3 million, rounded. And then what we do is we pull together our revenues and expenditures, and since you have this in your materials, I'm going to go ahead to a different slide so you can see the numbers a little clearer. And you can see that for fiscal year 24, I'm projecting right now at this early stage a budget deficit of about $1.4 million. For the following year, $1.56 million, and the deficits increase in those years. Now, I did want to say, although it can be concerning to look at projected deficit balances for all 5 fiscal years, it's important to remember that we're still early in the budget cycle. For me, the key takeaway from this forecast is that the town's operating budget is going to be under greater pressure in the near future as the town grapples with the effects of inflation in the national economy, while the growth of our main revenue source, property taxes, is constrained by the limitations of Proposition 2.5. So basically, it's a way of saying if we have inflation running at way over 8% and Proposition 2.5 limits property taxes to 2.5% plus new growth, you can see how we would have a problem. There's a few uncertain factors that could have a big impact on the budget, and this makes it challenging doing a budget projection at this time since we're just beginning the process, and I just wanted to run through those with you. The level of state aid, we talked a little bit about that earlier. We should know more in February, and no matter how the election turns out, we know that we're going to have a new governor, and that governor may have different budget priorities that could affect state aid. Health insurance. Our current health insurance budget in total is $15.2 million, so every 1% of an increase in our health insurance premiums is another $152,000, and that's significant. For the Neshoba assessment, although we haven't received our annual student enrollment number because schools are taking those early in October. We do understand that there's a renewed interest in vocational education over the last year or two, and total enrollment at Neshoba from all towns is expected to increase. We'll have to see in the spring how Chelmsford's increase in students relates to the other towns. And then inflation, I touched on that earlier. We're really going to be experiencing pressure from two sides of the budget. In personnel, as wages are going to be under pressure to go up. We're also going to see prices going up, and we already are seeing them go up, for supplies and services that the town purchases. So even if we buy the same level of supplies and the same level of services, we can expect to pay significantly more, just like all of us are seeing in the economy. And what we will need to research and monitor as we get into the new year is, will this high rate of inflation continue? Will it slow? A lot of that's going to depend on the action that the Federal Reserve Bank takes with their monetary policy and how quickly they adjust interest rates to try to slow down the rate of inflation. But we should know more in the new year in fiscal year 23. Just wanted to touch on reserves for a moment. Our financial plan includes maintaining a healthy stabilization fund and dedicating reserves towards stabilization and extraordinary capital like our roadways. The town ended fiscal year 22 with just over $3.4 million in free cash, and that was a decrease of $2.25 million from the prior fiscal year. As we know, the amount of free cash varies every year. This slide shows a history of certified free cash since 2013, and you can see it as a percentage of general budget operating revenues. This year it equaled about 2.29% of budgeted operating revenue. Take a closer look at stabilization. This chart shows the history of the fund since 2011 and the updated plan. We closed the last fiscal year on June 30th with a stabilization balance of $12.3 million. During the fiscal year, town meeting authorized one withdrawal of just over $82,000. And last year, at fall town meeting approved transferring $2 million of free cash into the fund. I did want to mention that the withdrawals that you see on the next 5 years for $500,000 or so, those are just there as a contingency for planning for unforeseen events. And then on this graph, we have a history of the stabilization fund as a percentage of total budgeted operating revenue, with the current fiscal year shown in red. And as you look at the graph, you'll see that we were fortunate to have ended FY22 with a balance of $12.38 million, because it appears that we're heading into an uncertain economic environment with record inflation and rising interest rates. Stabilization reserves are something that credit rating agencies such as Standard & Poor's pay a lot of attention to, and so it's important that we try to maintain stabilization reserves to retain our AA+ bond rating and reduce our long-term borrowing costs. That concludes a look at the 5-year forecast. If there's any questions, I'd be glad to answer those.
Alvin Draymond, stand further back. Alvin Draymond, Precinct 7. You listed the percentage increase of almost everything except the school budget. How much was that?
That was, yeah, it's, let's see. Oops, let me just grab that. The current, okay, the projected increase in the school budget, it will be, for the coming year, it's $70.7 million. So it would just be, it's $3.2 million divided by 70.7. I just don't have my, I can give you that. Mr. Moderator, to answer the previous speaker's question, on page 2 of the detailed 5-year forecast that's available to everyone, it looks like it's, excuse me for a minute, 4.74% for fiscal year '24. So, and it lists all of the percentage increases. When we developed the 5-year forecast, we did consult with both the school superintendent and the school business manager, and that's why they had input into this, and that's why the percentages vary by year.
No one else? Mr. Manager?
Thank you, John, and congratulations again on your induction into the Chelmsford High School Hall of Fame. Just have one slide, just as an overview for tonight's meeting. I'm giving you a projection of the proposed allocation of free cash. The motions under Articles 4, 11, 13, 14, and 15 are presented, just to give you an overview as we now move through those items in the course of the evening this evening. So that concludes the presentation under Article 1, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. We will go to Article,
Consent agenda.
the consent agenda. I will entertain a motion to approve Articles 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 16, and 25 as the consent agenda. Do I hear a motion? Do I have a second? We'll now vote on the consent agenda. Do we have, we should have that. And, does anyone wish to speak on that? Yes, we are voting on whether the consent agenda will be considered as a consent agenda. Not that, we're not approving the consent agenda, we're just approving the fact that there's, okay. All in favor of having this consent agenda, just raise your hands. Opposed? Okay, thank you. Unanimous. Mr. Manager?
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. As we have 11 articles on the consent agenda this evening, and we've, again, tried to put most of them together. So myself and Finance Director John Souza will go through them individually and then answer any questions. The first article pertains to the Cemetery Improvement and Development Fund. It's a request for transfer of $40,000 from the sale of graven lots account to the Cemetery Improvement and Development Fund. This is an article that appears at most fall and spring town meetings, and I'm going to ask John Souza, who's also a cemetery commissioner, to speak to this article.
Good evening again. So the projects that this will fund is, I'm sure many of you have had a chance to drive up Riverneck Road and see the expansion to Pine Ridge Cemetery. As you go past Forest Street and go around a sharp curve, that's where this area is. And what it's going to fund is, as you see on the slide, some chain link fencing. It's also going to allow the commission to install a new entrance area to provide better access to that part of the cemetery, because as that area is built out and developed, there'll be a need to have vehicle access into that area for funeral services and other things, visitors. It will also extend pavement from the Riverneck Road entrance to the new section of the cemetery and complete grading of the other 3 acres that are back in that new expanded area. So we would ask for your support for that article.
The next item on the consent agenda is Article 3, the Commonwealth Transportation Infrastructure Fund. Again, those of you who've been at fall town meeting in the past, every calendar year, the town, it's a nominal amount, $7,229.10. Since 2016, when the legislature adopted the statute for those which we call the ride share, your Uber and Lyft and so forth, people who utilize that service pay a 20-cent per ride assessment to the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities, and then half of that, or 10 cent per ride, is distributed to the community where the ride originates. We're required under current state law to appropriate the funds in the account, and then we annually have to report the expenditures to the state. So obviously, in calendar year 2021, we received the 7229, which is the motion this evening. This is down from what had been pre-COVID. You can see in calendar year 2019, it was almost $11,000, and then in last year in 2020, it was less than $6,000. So that basically meant that in calendar year 2021, there were over 72,000 rideshare rides originating in Chelmsford, and then we're required by statute to address the impact on transportation services, to basically use it for transportation-related purposes. The good news is the legislature just passed a law that becomes effective next July 1st, where if you've got less than $35,000 per year in these rideshare funds, you no longer will have to go to town meeting to request the appropriation because it's such a nominal amount. I mean, this fund is in the millions of dollars for a place like Cambridge and Boston and so forth, but in our case, it's a nominal amount, but we are required to appropriate it at town meeting, and then we include it in a nominal project for signage or other items that are related to transportation safety. The next article on the consent agenda is Article 4. This is an annual transfer at fall town meeting from free cash into the Sewer Construction Stabilization Fund, and I'm going to turn the podium over again to Finance Director John Souza, who manages this account.
Thank you, Town Manager Cohen. So this is an annual article, as the Town Manager said, that you've seen many times before. What this represents is this is the interest earnings on two funds that the town has. This is on the sewer capital improvement fee, which is the $5 surcharge on the sewer rate that all sewer billing accounts receive, and also on the sewer betterment account. And the reason we ask you to take this action every year is unless specified in the Massachusetts general laws, all the interest has to go into the general fund. And so this allows us to transfer the amount of interest earned on these two sources of money into the Sewer Construction Stabilization Fund, which we'll begin drawing upon in fiscal year 26. If you haven't had a chance, in the Finance Committee book on page 11, there's a good description of the Sewer Construction Stabilization Fund, and it also lays out the plan and shows that what we're doing each year is trying to build this up, and then we'll begin drawing upon it in fiscal year 26 through fiscal year 31 to pay future debt service charges. So we would ask for your support again this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Article 5 is the next item in the consent agenda, and again, this is a ministerial act, but required under our bylaws and under state law. We're seeking $40,000 that the town has received from the inclusionary housing zoning bylaw to the Affordable Housing Stabilization Fund. Our town zoning bylaw provides that a payment in lieu of construction of affordable units can be negotiated by the planning board for affordable housing type projects under the bylaws. What is required is a 2/3 majority is voted to appropriate these monies for any particular purpose. And you may recall that happened last February when the town appropriated almost the entirety of the fund to the construction of the new affordable housing units that will be constructed at 255 Princeton Street by the Chelmsford Housing Authority's nonprofit Choice. So what's happened since that time, as you can see, the fund is down to $3,440. However, during the past year, there was a planning board project regarding the redevelopment of the former Glenview restaurant site at 248 Princeton Street. And in that, the planning board negotiated a fee of $40,000 in lieu of the construction of affordable housing units. So what the town meeting does again is votes this into the Affordable Housing Stabilization Fund, and that at a future town meeting would be asked and would have to authorize by a 2/3 vote the expenditures of these funds for a affordable housing project. Article 6 is no action. There was a placeholder for collective bargaining agreements. Article 7 is unpaid bills from the prior fiscal year. Fortunately, there are no unpaid bills that have come to surface, and we just had our auditors in last week, and again, it seems like we did not have any this past fiscal year. And then Article 8 was a placeholder in case there were any amendments to the current fiscal year operating budget that was voted back in April. And again, there's no action being taken to change the budget that was approved. Article 9 is a new article, and this may actually be the only time that this comes to town meeting because, again, there's pending legislation at the State House that would avoid the necessity of town meeting vote. But as many of you may be aware, in this case, we're asking for $139,844 to be appropriated in accordance with the Massachusetts Attorney General's statewide opioid settlement abatement fund allocation agreement. The town participated with many other municipalities across the country in class action litigation against manufacturers and distributors of opioids. At the end of the resolution of the litigation, the states entered into parties with manufacturers, some distributors, and there is this proposed settlement distribution schedule. In Massachusetts, 40% of the revenues is distributed to cities and towns, and then basically there's a available list across the Commonwealth of how that money is to be allocated across the 351 cities and towns. This money is restricted. It has to be expended to supplement and strengthen resources for prevention, harm, reduction, treatment, and recovery pertaining to opioids. From now till 2035, the town of Chelmsford is scheduled to receive an allocation of almost $665,000. There's a lump sum up front of almost $140,000, which you're being asked to appropriate this evening. And then for the remaining period, the annual amount varies between $24,000 to $41,000. And then there is an annual reporting requirement to the state. So under this article, the funds would be appropriated because the Department of Revenue has directed that cities and towns have to, at this point in time, vote those monies at town meeting, even though they are a restricted fund. We anticipate in the future that if the legislation that is pending at the State House, that would avoid a town meeting appropriation, but would still provide the reporting requirements and efforts to the state. And they would purchase things like Narcan and counselors and other local and regional treatment opportunities. Article 10 is withdrawn by the petitioners. There's no action under Article 10. We now move to Article 16 on the consent agenda, and it is the only CPC article on the agenda, and this is a nominal transfer of $15,000 from the Community Preservation Fund General Reserve to contract with a professional preservationist to perform historic inventories of properties across the community. This article and request for funding comes periodically before the town meeting. The goal is to allow for the research, compilation, and development of a database of the town's historic assets, mostly residential homes. And if you go on the website, the address there at the chelmsfordgov.com, you can see that a lot of the homes from the 1700s have been archived and assembled with photos and so forth on the website. And now they really want to begin the efforts of doing some homes in the 1800s. And then again, when this allocation funding is expended, then they'll come back for future steps along the way for their project. And then the final article is Article 25, and that's at the end of the warrant, and that's an article pertaining to easements for Charles Way. And the reason this is on the consent agenda is there's no action being requested on this article. However, you will see Charles Way on the special town meeting that's been scheduled for Thursday evening. So that's why there's no action under Charles Way on this warrant this evening. That concludes the presentation under the consent agenda, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you, Your Honor. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends Articles 2, 3, 4, 5, 9, 16, and takes no action on Articles 6, 7, 8, 10, and 25.
Does the Select Board have a recommendation?
The Select Board unanimously recommends approval of Articles 2, 3, 4, 5, 9, and 16, and took no action on Articles 6, 7, 8, 10, and 25.
Thank you. Now's an opportunity for people to ask questions if they have any, or to engage in discussion. Appear to be none. We will now vote on the consent agenda. A yes vote will be to approve Articles 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 16, and 25 to the extent that they are articles that require action on the part of town meeting. The article passes 116 in favor, 1 in opposition, no abstentions. So we now jump to Article 11.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 11 is the first article pertaining to the expenditure of the town's free cash for the current fiscal year. And the motion is to transfer $1.5 million in free cash to fund roadway and sidewalk construction. As you've heard at previous town meetings, the Commonwealth has level funded Chapter 90 roadway construction for the past decade at $200 million statewide. The town has received $1.15 million in what we call Chapter 90 roadway funding for the last decade. This represents, unfortunately, only about a third of we do supplement the state's funding with $750,000 of roadway and sidewalk construction in our capital budget at Springtown meeting. And the additional $1.5 million would allow us to perform additional road work, approximately 3.25 miles of road reclamation. We have 187 miles of public way under the town's jurisdiction that the town maintains. We have a 5-year pavement management plan. We've updated it at the end of this construction season because the roadway conditions continue to evolve over time. For this past calendar year, meaning from this past April to basically 3 weeks from now, the DPW will have completed almost 9 3/4 miles of road construction of an expenditure of $2.8 million this year. For calendar year 23, which is basically the construction season that's going to start next April through November, our capital planning is to pave an additional 4.12 miles of roadway at a cost of just over $1 million. We've been informed by the state that they are under a unique program that they've not offered in the past. They're scheduled to expend $1.1 million to resurface 2.94 miles of locally controlled roadways that are numbered routes. So basically, it's going to be the section of Route 4, or North Road, from the Interstate 495 interchange to Drum Hill Rotary, and then the entire length of Groton Road out here from Vinyl Square to the Westford Town Line. Therefore, if we could achieve an additional $1.5 million in funding for roadways, we would do the reclamation of an additional 3.25 miles of roadway for the upcoming year in accordance with our roadway management plan. And again, we recognize the challenges of roadway funding in the Commonwealth. What we don't have at this point in time is our bid prices for the upcoming construction year. That will take place over the winter. And there will be a fuel adjustment clause, as you can imagine, in there, given the volatility of the price of petroleum. So our best estimates are what we presented this evening, and we'll continue our priority of our roadways and report to you probably next time at Springtown meeting in terms of what we foresee in the foreseeable future. But the additional $1.5 million would, again, enable the town to improve our roadway network. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Does the Finance Committee have recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 11.
Does the Select Board have recommendation?
The Select Board unanimously recommends approval of Article 11.
Does anyone have any questions, discussion?
Mr. Moderator, Badru from Precinct 11. A question The state is able to get 2.94 miles at an efficiency of about 375,000 a mile. The town is looking at about 468,000, a difference of about 85K, give or take. Is there an opportunity to align with the state and get better rates?
No, the difference is a different type of work. What the state's doing out on North Road and Groton Road is what we call mill and grind. That's normally what you see if you drive down the highway and they're doing paving. They go out there and they pick up the cover surface, and then they go over it with another layer of asphalt. And that's your least expensive paving approach. When we use the word reclamation, that's a more serious construction. That's when you go into a roadway and you're basically going beyond that. You're actually rebuilding the base of the road and then doing the top surface coat. So that explains the differential in pricing.
Thank you. Next question. Is there a known plan which 3.25 mil section will be reclaimed or a priority list?
Yes. Yes, there is.
And it's published somewhere on the town website? Or?
Yes, we presented it and I believe it's on our website. And yes, that, again, it's subject to change because we don't know exactly what our pricing is going to be. But how it works is you have your arterial roads, your collector roads, and your minor roads. And the difference in that is that your arterial roads handle more volume and more speed. And so they tend to wear more and carry it, and for safety reasons, carry more traffic. And then again, you step back. So what ends up happening is you want to maintain your arterial and collector road status, particularly your arterial roads first. And so, for example, you'll see us out there on Drum Hill Road doing work and probably replacing that roadway surface quicker than we would a cul-de-sac or a minor road because of the volume. And what you don't want to do is lose those roads because then you get into a heavier cost for reconstruction. But yes, there is a list.
Okay, thank you. One more question. Is there any planned sidewalk construction along these, if in the priority list?
Some of the roads do call for sidewalk construction. As this was explained at the select board meeting recently, we are right now in the process of having a professional engineering firm evaluate all the town's sidewalk in the community, and they're scheduled to report back by April with the report and inventory, and then we'll have a discussion in which we'll bring in the community, the school committee, the select board, and the community as a whole to discuss not only the reconstruction of existing sidewalks, but also if there are any new sidewalks that should be constructed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? There being none, we will now vote Article 11 to transfer $1.5 million from free cash to fund roadway and sidewalk construction. And this requires a two-thirds vote, if I recall. The article passes 117 in favor, 1 opposed, no abstentions. Article 12.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 12 is a request to transfer $500,000 from the Sewer Enterprise Fund retained earnings to examine the condition of the oldest sections of the town's sewer force mains. The town is required by the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection to provide a pump station and force main assessment report. That report was sent to me by email within the last 2 weeks, and there'll be a presentation at the Select Board's meeting on November 7th in terms of a plan of how we're going to go to the future in terms of maintenance of our pump stations and sewer lines. What is known by the consultant and timely for this town meeting is we need to begin the assessment of the oldest sections, which were ductile iron sewer force mains of the town's sewer system. That's basically areas such as Richardson Road, Progress Avenue, Katrina Road, Southwell Road, and Kensington Road. So that's what's being requested here is they'll go out and they'll examine the pipes without actually cutting cores from the pipes to get a sense of the condition of those pipes, and then report back to the town as well as to the DEP in terms of what efforts and action should be taken going forward in terms of investment in our system. Right now, the Sewer Enterprise Fund retained earnings, which is basically the free cash for the Sewer Enterprise Fund, because again, we account and designate the sewer operations separately. That balance is $844,000, and we'll use $500,000 for this purpose. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 12.
Does the Select Board have a recommendation?
The Select Board unanimously recommends approval of Article 12.
Any questions?
Alvin Draymond, Precinct 7. Sounds like something that has to be done, but it's $500,000 just to examine the sewers. That just seems like a really large number. Do you know why it's that large?
Through you, Mr. Moderator. In fact, that won't get all the roads that or the pipes that I've listed. We've got a large network of pipes underground. What they have to do is go in and periodically sample the cores of those pipes, with the technology what we're trying to do is avoid breakage like we recently had up at Southwell. Those are the costs that it takes to do this type of work.
What do they actually do? Do they dig around into the pipe and then expose it and examine it?
No, what they do is they periodically go into the pipe and almost like a sonar type of technology without actually coring the pipe to get a sense of the strength and durability of the pipe that's in there. And then if there are issues, then you've got to either replace or reline the piping.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? There being none, we will vote on Article 12 to appropriate $500,000 from the Sewer Enterprise Fund, retain earnings to examine the condition of the oldest sections of the town's sewer force mains. The article passes 110 in favor, 2 opposed, 3 abstentions. Article 13.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 13 is to fund PFAS remediation. The request is a transfer of $254,500 from free cash towards the remediation efforts that are taking place over at the town's former highway yard at 54 Richardson Road. Again, we've been town meeting before in terms of the funding for this project. The PFAS have been detected in a majority of the monitoring wells that were discovered during a 2021 monitoring event. We believe that the source area is adjacent to the highway garage structure, or the former highway garage structure that was in existence for decades. The concern there is that the site is in close proximity to the North Chelmsford Water District wells. This is all being performed under the supervision of the Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection. The treatment system was operational back at the beginning of July. We only have one round of sampling at this point in time. However, the initial round of sampling is encouraging. So we have a treatment system to pump, treat, and re-inject into the groundwater for years to come. This funding would pay for some of the costs associated with the construction and actually ongoing suggested modifications to the system by our engineers, as well as the ongoing sampling, reporting, and operational costs for this system. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 13.
Does the Select Board have a recommendation?
The Select Board unanimously recommends approval of Article 13.
Any questions?
I just would like, Evelyn Thorne, Precinct 7. Just some clarifying questions that I had. So we have already installed pumps that are there, and we have supported that financially by another vote of a prior meeting. Now we have another appropriation of finances currently. In here, it does say for a period of years. Do we know how long it's going to take to do this? And are we looking for future expenditures?
I don't believe our engineers have given us an estimated duration for the pumping system. I think that's really going to depend upon two things. One is how the system performs, and the other one is what are the environmental requirements for cleanup, because what we're hearing now from the federal government and likely to come down through the state is they're continuing to reduce the thresholds for PFAS contamination. So we don't know what that will mean in terms of duration at our site. So that's hard to say. When we received our report from our engineers, they came in and reported some cost overruns they had in constructing the system, as well as some suggested modifications to the system that's out there that would reduce operating costs in the future, as well as the ongoing testing and operation of the system. So I don't think we'll be requiring this amount going forward, but I think you'll be looking at least six figures for the ongoing costs of treatment, sampling, reporting, and such for that system.
How much was the prior appropriation for? You don't have to go to the
I don't
pen.
remember the number offhand.
Because
what
if
the
we're
original cost
continuing to
was.
go out, then it's just going to get more expensive. I am not against this article. I'm definitely in favor of the article. I just wanted some clarification on what we might be expecting in the future. And then the next question, you may not know this answer, but when they do remediate it and they do a filtration process, is it the state that is dealing with the disposal of that waste, or us?
Well, what happens is the groundwater goes back into the ground, and then there is some byproduct that is disposed of as well, and that's part of the ongoing cost of the system, which again, I think we anticipate to be about $100,000 or so annually going forward into at least to the end of this decade, I would think at the earliest.
Right, so it's the state that is
It's
involved in
mandating us.
doing that, and
Yeah,
it's
we're-
not us that
We're under a consent order, we have to perform this work
Right.
because of the environmental threat to the North Chelmsford Water District's wells.
Right, and I do understand that, and I hope that we do pass this because it's very important for the impact on our environment and on our health. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Kevin Gasilla, Precinct 1. I've just got a reporting question. Is this progress going to be reported in like the North Chelmsford water quality usual reports that we get, or will we have to look somewhere else?
No, they have it. We report to the select board quarterly when they get the sampling results, and we notify the North Chelmsford Water District of those data and results, and they have a chance to comment at select board meetings. But as you noted, the water districts have a reporting requirement. Fortunately, to date, the North Chelmsford Water District does not have a reportable, meaning threshold condition of PFAS in their water supply. But yes, you will see that in their reports going forward, as well as for the other water districts in town.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? There being none, we will now vote to transfer $254,500 from free cash to remediate PFAS in the soil and groundwater at 54 Richardson Road. The article passes 114 in favor, 1 opposed, 1 abstention. We will now move to Article 14.
Okay, Article 14 and Article 15 are the last two articles pertaining to the appropriation of the town's free cash. This article is to transfer free cash to reduce the property tax levy, and the amount under the motion is $164,513 to reduce the current fiscal year's property tax levy. In perspective, last fiscal year, the town appropriated $1 million to reduce the property tax levy. In the last fiscal year, average single-family property tax bill amounted to just over $7,800 on a property that was assessed at approximately $500,000. This year, the total appropriation of free cash would be $500,000. And many of you may recall at town meeting 2 weeks ago, an amount of $335,487 was appropriated in free cash. So if you take the amount that's requested here, the total would amount to $500,000 of funding, which is the consensus amount that I arrived at with the Finance Committee and Select Board, and that would result in a reduction of approximately $35 to the average single-family property tax bill. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
A majority of the Finance Committee recommends approval with a vote of 4 in favor, 1 against, and 2 absent.
Does the Select Board have a recommendation?
The Select Board unanimously recommends approval of Article 14.
We do have an amendment. Mr. Regazio?
Again, Mr. Regazio, Paul Regazio, Precinct 2. My amendment is to amend this to $630,000, and I'll explain how I got to that number. Again, first of all, I do want to thank the town manager and the town departments for saving the $3 million in the last year's budget, so thank you for that. But again, I respectfully disagree with the town's explanation of Article 14 regarding the $165,000. This article was originally going to be $1 million, and then the Select Board reduced it to $500,000, okay, which is the history of this. Okay, as the town manager mentioned at the previous special meeting, which was settling the $420,000 police contract, we approved $335,000 of that to be taken from the Stabilization Fund. So I don't know why we're now taking it away from the money, that's applied to the current year taxes. The $335,000 of that settlement applied to 3 or 4 prior years. It had nothing to do with the expenditures that we're facing for the coming year. So again, I think that it's inappropriate that the $500,000 initially that was proposed to be affect the the current year taxes to be reduced by that amount, since we already decided to fund it coming out of the Stabilization Fund. I am proposing that, again, since the surplus we had was roughly $3 million, we have allocated about $1.2 million of it with the previous articles. So my presentation is to split that money in half so that one half of it, roughly $630,000, go to reduce the taxes, and the remaining $629,000 go to the Stabilization Fund. For those who are not familiar with me, I'm a retired corporate finance person.
Okay, Mr. Regazio, I mean, you did the presentation. Are you going to be arguing your?
No, I'm just asking.
Well, I understand. The next protocol would be that I would ask the Finance Committee, the Select Board, and then ask people to argue their point. I mean, we understand what the article is.
And again, I just want to finish to say I just ask for the town meeting to approve this. Again, give some benefit to the town taxpayers. We have a $3 million surplus. We're allocating only $160,000 to the current year taxes. I think that is very small. And again, I think to split the remaining $1 million between reducing current year taxes.
Mr. Regazio,
and
you've already told us all of this stuff.
Okay.
These people are very intelligent.
Okay.
They can do the math.
Okay, all right.
Okay?
Thank you.
So, no, and I'm not trying to cut you short, but you're starting to say the same thing over and over again.
I
And
just wanted to end what I said, what my position was.
No, we know it very, very well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay? Does anyone else want to discuss the amendment? No? Okay. So the amendment before the town meeting is to strike the number of 164,513 and replace it with the number of $630,000. Okay? So a yes vote would be to approve the amendment, and then we would vote on the article. The article fails, 27 in favor, 81 opposed, 3 abstentions. So now we go back to the original Article 14, which is to appropriate and transfer $164,513 from free cash. Does anyone have any discussion regarding that? There being none, we will now vote on that once the screen says we can. The article passes 101 in favor, 16 opposed, 1 abstention. Article 15.
Article 15 is the last article pertaining to free cash. This is a request to transfer $1,089,782 from free cash to the General Stabilization Fund. As Finance Director John Souza reported earlier this evening, our current balance in the Stabilization Fund is $12.4 million. Our last year's operating budget was $149.5 million. So therefore, 12.4 represents 8.3% of the town's operating budget. The town's financial policies recommend that the reserves be maintained between 5 and 10% of our general operating revenues. And given this extraordinary period of high inflation with the uncertainty of recession ahead of us, we're seeing the state and other governments increase their cash reserves, and therefore we'd ask that you transfer the funds to the Stabilization Fund as requested. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 15.
Does the Select Board have a recommendation?
The Select Board unanimously recommends approval of Article 15.
Any questions? Or argument, whatever you want.
Claire Janot, Precinct 4. I have a question. In the chat on page 11 in the handouts, it shows the transfers in and out and the interest. And I'm wondering, for 2021, it shows a $2.3 million withdrawal, $2,341,388, which is substantially higher than every other year. Many years it's zero. Last year was $82,000. So I'm just curious what made that year so significant.
COVID.
I don't
Yeah,
recall.
that was the pandemic, and that's when we appropriated funds, again, not knowing what was going to happen in terms of the town's financial condition, but that was the extraordinary period of the COVID-19 pandemic. So that's what made that a different year.
Okay. So that was all COVID-related, or is that what we're
Yeah.
saying?
Yeah. John can speak to it.
Mr. Moderator, to answer the previous speaker's question, I believe around roughly 2 million. I don't have the numbers right in front of me going back to fiscal year 21, but I believe it was about 2 million we did a transfer from general stabilization to supplement the budget, not knowing the uncertainty due to the pandemic. And there may have been 200,000 or 300,000 or so of budget adjustments that we did by the end of the year, but I would.
So would that be the explanation for why the free cash was so much bigger in that year? Because it was maybe a preemptive move that ended up not being necessary, or? Because I think in the free cash chart, what we see is that this year, in your presentation, John, of the five-year plan, I think, I don't have the numbers right in front of me, but, well, no, I do actually, thank you. We had free cash of $5,670,000 for 2022 versus $3.4 million this year. And it was presented as if that 2.29 was a decline, which it was, but it was a decline because the year before was so high as a percentage of budget on free cash. So I don't think our free cash is running like we're lower than usual. It's pretty much where it usually is. The year before was much unusual, similar to the stabilization fund, right? So my point is,
Now,
what
are
I'd like-
you?
I have a question.
Okay, I'm just trying.
Thank you. My question is, I don't think that trying not to upset the moderator.
No, I'm not upset. I just want to know if you're engaged in
Well, but I
debate
do
or
get
asking a
nervous,
question.
John, I want you to know.
And when you say "I think," or my point is,
I am thinking, and that's a good thing, right? So I think, I think that 9% or 7 to 10 or whatever our current policy is on the amount of money we'd like to have in the stabilization fund is widely accepted and generally a good thing. But when I look at the chart, I don't see that we've needed, which is also a good thing, to take a lot of money out of it. My question is, if we're running so tight on capital and we've slowly tried to increase the amount of our annual capital budget, but it still seems to not be enough, whether it's for roads or sidewalks or anything else, is there a plan for how we intend to use the stabilization fund other than for emergencies, is my question. Because we're...
okay, hold on. That's a
That's
great
the
question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Through you, Mr. Moderator. We are right now in our budget formulation process. At the end of this month, we will have received our capital requests from town departments, as well as their operating budget requests. One of our concerns that we're seeing when we're bidding projects now is that the project costs are rising greater than the traditional amounts of projects. And in fact, projects that were previously brought under ARPA funding or town meeting articles, we're struggling to fund them within the budget. So we anticipate we may need some of this funding, as well as the ARPA funding, to address some of the town's capital needs. But no, we do not have a detailed plan to draw off of the stabilization fund. And I think the reason for that is twofold. We've been through a financial roller coaster. As you noted, during the pandemic, we expected, meaning society expected, that we would see a reduction in receipts. And what had happened was the opposite. The state revenues came in above their forecast significantly, which is why everybody's going to get checks pretty soon from the state. And the same thing happened at the local level. Our revenues, most conservative forecasts didn't materialize. Now we're in the same thing, and it was actually reported today by the governor's office. Revenues at this point are running ahead of the forecast that they use to produce the current state year's budget. However, they're not making any adjustment because it's too early in time to make that adjustment. In this year's state budget actually calls for less revenue than the state had received in the last fiscal year. And nobody seems to know what's going to happen in the months and years ahead with the volatility of interest rates, the inflation, and perhaps a recessionary period. So at this point, we're proceeding. As you can see, we have a budgetary challenge in front of us. And I think as that becomes clearer, we will develop a plan without trying to live off our savings account. So I think the short answer to your question is, we probably may use that towards capital type of projects, whether it's infrastructure, buildings, roads, or what have you. But we're not there yet because I think there's just too much uncertainty, and we would hope that between now and April, there'll be a lot more clarity in terms of what's happening with the local and national economy, as well as what's happening with the new administration that will be governing this state. And also things like the ballot question that's going to come in November that, may have an impact on local finance as well. So short answer is there's too much uncertainty to, no, we don't have a plan, but we hope in the next few months to get more clarity. But it's going to be a challenge for us because, for example, when the new governor takes office in January, because it is a new governor, they actually have until mid-February to submit the proposed state budget, which is actually beyond the period where we have to expend the town's budget. So it's a real period of extraordinary inflation, uncertainty, and unknowns. And what we'll try to do is keep everybody informed to the best information that we have it.
So short answer would be, I appreciate the answer, thank you very much. It's truly a rainy day fund at this point with no particular plan of use.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Hi, Ginger Skoog, Precinct 5, I think. So kind of continuing on from the previous speaker's questions, if we don't transfer this cash or this money from free cash to the general stabilization fund, what happens to it?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, it just remains in free cash.
Okay.
So it doesn't go anywhere. It just remains as free cash. The only difference would be is to expend money from the general stabilization fund, you need a 2/3 vote. If you expend it from free cash, you only need a majority vote.
Wonderful. That was my next question. Thank you. Mr. Moderator, please start the clock. So, every town meeting, we're up here, and we're having everybody say that we don't have enough to fund whatever infrastructure project we have. We don't have enough fund things. And we're about to start coming up on a period of uncertainty. We've done a great job, our town manager and finance directors have done a great job of getting our stabilization fund to the level of where it is at. However, we've got some large expenses that could possibly be coming up within the next 6 months. You've got a sidewalk assessment coming, you've got road assessments coming, and these are just two that are sort of hot buttons right now. And at the same time, we're talking about a potential rise in interest rates on borrowing and other kinds of project funding. We know what the costs of materials are now. We know what the costs are going to be in probably a short term. I'd like to vote against this bill or this article and suggest that we keep this money in free cash for some of these short-term assessments to come in, and maybe let's take a stab at putting some real work into some of our infrastructure that's coming up over the next couple of months without having to go back into the general stabilization fund and just keep everything where it's at. Thank you.
Thank you.
Glenn Thorne, Precinct 7. I would urge you to vote in favor of this transfer to the General Stabilization Fund. The town manager's done a wonderful job taking what was almost a zero stabilization fund and bringing it up to a level where we can maintain our good bond rating. The difference between keeping it in free cash and putting it in the stabilization fund is, as the town manager said, in free cash, you can just have a majority vote and it goes to whatever you want it to go to. In the stabilization fund, you really have to need the expenditure to make the argument that 2/3 of the town meeting wants to spend the money. And if your budget is anything like my budget, you want to maintain as much flexibility and liquidity as you can. Instead of making it easier to spend the money, it should be a little bit harder to spend the money. Now, when we've had to take stuff out of the stabilization fund with a 2/3 vote, it requires that a good argument be presented of, why am I going to buy this piece of capital equipment? Why am I going to spend it on some other emergency measure? It is a fund that requires a little bit more effort in order to expend the funds. And I believe we're in a recession currently. It may not look that way to some people, but when the layoffs start occurring in commercial industry, it'll look more like a recession than it does right now. But surely, with interest rates rising and expenditures rising for all of us individually at home, you know, we have to take a good hard look at where that next dollar is going to leave and be spent. And so when you put it in the stabilization fund, it requires us to have a strong argument for the expenditure, and I much prefer that 2/3 vote to take it out and spend it than to have just a majority vote. If something looks good to, the majority plus one vote, we're going to spend the money. So I think this is an insurance policy against spending the money easier than having the good argument why we should spend it at all.
1 minute.
Pardon?
1 minute.
Yes, I can see. Thank
I
you.
told you I'll tell you 1 minute, so I'm telling you.
Thank you very much. I'd like those 10 seconds back. But anyway,
I'll give them to you, Glenn.
I would urge you to vote to put this money in the stabilization fund, because if we are serious about our expenditures and serious about maintaining the fiscal strength of the town, this is where that money belongs, and not in something that can take just a majority vote. We'll spend it correctly. We have in the past. We will in the future.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay, apparently not. So now we're going to be voting on Article 15 to transfer $1,089,782 from free cash to the stabilization fund. The article passes 110 in favor, 10 opposed, no abstentions. Article 17, I believe.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 17 is a means to provide property tax relief for senior citizens. What's being requested in this article is to amend the vote that was most recently taken at the April Springtown meeting in 2015 that increased the cap on the senior property tax work-off program to $100,000. What this article is doing is basically to repeal the cap in its entirety. Just to refresh people on how this program works is residents over the age of 60 can volunteer to perform services to the town in exchange for a reduction in their property tax bill. The hourly rate for this program is capped at the minimum wage. Right now it's $14.25. It's going up to $15 per hour on January 1st. And the maximum reduction of the property tax bill under the base program in state statute is $1,500 per fiscal year. We have over 100 seniors that participate in this program annually. Therefore, if you do the math, at a funding cap of $100,000 with 100 seniors, the reduction in the property tax bill is capped at $1,000 per year. What we're seeking here under this article is to remove the cap and then allow the seniors to earn an additional $500 per year to $1,500 under the program, and that would cost an approximately $50,000 per fiscal year, and that funding comes under the town's overlay account, which is the amount that the state sets us to provide for property tax abatements and exemptions under our operating budget. I realize that there may be more than 100 seniors if the program expands, but in speaking to the town accountant and the finance director, it's our assessment that the town's overlay account for abatements and exemption can absorb the variability in the program. So again, this is the type of program where volunteer seniors do work in this building. They can work in the town offices, DPW, police, fire, you name it, to provide services to the community. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 17.
Select Board have a recommendation.
The Select Board unanimously recommends approval of Article 17.
Any questions, comments? There being none, we will now vote on Article 17. Which removes the $100,000 annual cap on the Senior Citizen Property Tax Work-Off Abatement Program. The article passes unanimously, 113 in favor and 2 abstentions. Article 18.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. This is the second and final action to provide property tax relief for senior citizens. And this one, again, follows state statute because, again, local finance were dictated and governed by state law. And this one would do is it would increase the amount under the statute from $500 per fiscal year to $1,000 per fiscal year for this means-tested senior citizen property tax exemption. And it'll just describe the program eligibility requirements because they're rather stringent. You can see only few people qualify for this program. But in order to be eligible for this program, you need to be 65 or older. You have to show evidence of ownership of a domicile and occupancy. You actually have to provide your income tax returns, bank statements, and other asset account statements. You must have lived within the state for the past 10 years and have owned and occupied property for any five of those past 10 years. The income limits are very limited. So the threshold ceiling is $30,000 for a single person and $45,000 for a married couple. And the asset limit excluding your home is stringent as well. It's $40,000 for a single person and $55,000 for a married couple. This past year, only 41 program participants, i.e. 41 people in the community, were eligible for this program. A few years back, the numbers were in the 60s. So again, with 41 people at an additional $500 of property tax assistance, the expected cost is roughly $20,000 for those who are managing to stay in this community at these threshold and asset limits. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 18.
Select Board have a recommendation.
The Select Board unanimously recommends approval of Article 18.
Any questions? There being none, we will vote on Article 18, which is to increase the senior citizen property tax exemption from $500 per fiscal year to $1,000 per fiscal year. Passes unanimously, 115 in favor, no opposition, 1 abstention. Article 19.
Yeah, Mr. Moderator, town meeting representatives, Article 19 is a proposed amendment to the town charter. Therefore, it would require a 2/3 vote at town meeting this evening, as followed by a majority vote at the ballot at the next April town election. This pertains to the audit requirements of Section 6-7 of the town charter. And this was developed in consultation with the Select Board, and I'm going to ask Finance Director John Souza to present on this article this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. The genesis for this article goes back to January of this year when a town accountant, Darlene Lucier, and I worked together on a procurement for a new firm to perform the town's annual financial audit. And I should say that the contract for the audit, for the financial audit of the town is under the approval of our select board. And so what we found is, in this part of New England, essentially, there are really 3 to 4 audit firms that are qualified to perform a financial audit on a town the size of Chelmsford. So we issued an RFP, a request for proposals, to qualified firms. And what we found was surprising. The marketplace had really changed over the last few years. Previously, whenever we would issue an RFP for auditing services, it was extremely competitive, and you could usually count on receiving at least 3 proposals. So in January, we mailed proposals to 3 firms and then only received 1 sealed proposal. So just before the deadline to submit approached, we didn't want to leave anything to chance. We contacted the firms that had not submitted one, and just to talk with them, the management of the firm, and ask if they had any reservations or why they may not have decided not to submit one. And what they told us is that their staffing at their firms are very limited, and they already had an adequate workload, and they really weren't interested in taking on new clients. And they explained it was for a couple of reasons. First, that each year there are a very limited pool of CPAs that graduate from accounting programs, and of that number, there's an even smaller subset of those CPAs that choose to specialize in municipal auditing. Most of the others would work, of course, in the private sector. And their firms already had additional work scheduled in the pipeline because they were doing a lot more additional audit and reporting for the federal ARPA funds for all their existing municipal clients. So basically what they were telling us in a nutshell is, based on our staffing levels that we already have plenty of work, and we're really not interested in taking on your town at this time. The other considerations are what we call transition costs of an audit. So whenever a new firm begins auditing Chelmsford, there are higher startup costs. Why is that? They need to perform extensive research of our current and prior year financial statements and the town's general ledger to get a better historical perspective of all of the finances that they're being asked to audit. So this helps them perform trend analysis. So they would have to gather that from our town accountant. And they would also gather data from the treasurer's office as well, primarily bond information, debt service, etc. The firm would charge more to a town if they can only spread those startup or transition costs in 3 years rather than in 5 years or more. So Darlene and I reported this information to the Select Board in mid-February when they signed the new contract with the firm. And they understood our points, but the Select Board was required under the town charter to select a new audit firm for a 3-year period. And so after discussion, everyone agreed that really the next practical step was to bring this forward to town meeting for consideration. So basically what we're seeking to do is, and you saw the language that's lined out, as it currently stands now, the town's required to change the audit firm every 3 years. And so, I would point out that both the town accountant and I welcome, in our positions, we welcome new firms analyzing and scrutinizing the work that we do. We just felt we had an obligation to discuss with the Select Board and to bring it forward to you for consideration that it's really no longer practical for the town to change firms every 3 years, and it will result in much higher costs to the town. So, as the town manager said, if the charter change is approved by town meeting tonight, the next step is it would then go to the voters in our annual town election by a ballot vote to approve that. So if there's any questions, I'll be glad to take those, but that concludes my presentation, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 19.
Select Board have a recommendation.
The Select Board unanimously recommends approval of Article 19.
Susan Tanner, Precinct 2. Just a point of clarification. The bullet points indicate changing the audit firm. Government Finance Officers Association recommends the audit contracts be for at least 5 years. But yet, in the article itself, it mentions audit team. So I'd like a clarification. Do you really, and your references seem to indicate a change in the firm, not the firm's team. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, so Mr. Moderator, to answer the previous speaker's question, the old language required that we change the firm every 3 years. When we discussed it as a group, we felt that everyone agreed that this language would give the town more flexibility, and that if it didn't seem practical to change the firm after a 5-year contract, what could be done, and what's done in a lot of towns, is the lead auditor and their team would be changed up. So if it's a very large firm, we'll just call it Smith Jones. The lead auditor and all of the auditors that are with them could be changed up and still work for the same firm as Smith Jones. So that was the intent of the language being written as it is.
Thank you.
And that would give us a fresh set of eyes without necessarily changing the firm.
Anyone else? There being none, we will now vote on Article 19, which is to change the annual audit section of the town charter. This does require a 2/3 vote. Article passes 109 in favor, 7 opposed, no abstentions. Article 20.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Article 20 is a request to authorize the Select Board to petition the General Court, more commonly referred to as the state legislature, to enact a special act pertaining to the deputy fire chief position in the town of Chelmsford, i.e. to remove the deputy fire chief position from civil service. The language of the act is as simple as presented there. It's actually modeled upon the language that was drafted 2 decades ago when the town removed the deputy police chief from civil service. Basically, the position would be exempt in Section 1. In Section 2, the current holder would not lose any rights, and therefore the status would not change until that person vacated the office. And then Article 3, Section 3, it would be effective on its passage. Provide some background. The Chelmsford fire chief position has never been covered by the Massachusetts Civil Service Law. The town meeting voted back in 1993, representative town meeting voted to exempt the police chief position from civil service. A decade later, or 2 decades ago, in 2003, the town meeting saw appropriate to exempt the deputy police chief position from civil service. What this change would do is it would provide the opportunity for the fire chief, as his colleague has in the police department, to choose his deputy who could best assist him or her to perform the responsibilities of the position, and therefore provide parity in the public safety departments and assist the town in succession planning. How it works now is the fire chief and police chief are appointed by the town manager, subject to confirmation by the select board. The fire chief, as is the police chief, are what known as strong fire chiefs in the state. They get to choose who the deputy would be with the approval of the town manager. The alternative would be to remain in the civil service system, and the chief would have the option, when the opportunity arrives, now and in the future, to utilize a civil service examination and also the option of an assessment center through the civil service system. The way it currently works is you have to have a majority of the next lower rank, which in our case would be fire captains, to conduct the examination. If the majority of the lower rank does not participate, then you open it up to the next lower rank, which currently would be firefighters in the town of Chelmsford. What's being sought here is not a repeal of civil service. Civil service is appropriate in this community for entry-level firefighters, police officers. We have civil service up through police sergeants and police lieutenants. We have civil service for fire captains as well as firefighters. We're not seeking to eliminate civil service. What we're seeking to do is talk about the most effective way for the person who's chosen to lead this department to choose their assistant or deputy to most effectively run that department. The alternative is if you have the civil service system and you have the person who scores the highest, the chief either has to accept that person or go through the process of bypassing that person, justifying and having civil service procedure to uphold that bypass. So that's what we're seeking in the position this evening. This is not political. I don't know who the next people are that are interested in becoming the next deputy fire chief. I don't know when the current deputy fire chief is seeking to leave his position. What I do know and what I do see and what I have experienced firsthand is I've seen this process work well in the police department. When I arrived here, Chief Murphy was chief and deputy chief was Scott Ubley. When Deputy Chief Scott Ubley departed, Chief Murphy chose Deputy Chief Spinney to be his deputy. And then when Chief Murphy retired and Chief Spinney became appointed to the chief position, he then chose Dan Ahern amongst his lieutenants, and he had a qualified base to choose from. And then when Deputy Ahern retired and took the position in Maine, Chief Spinney knew his command staff, interviewed those who were interested, and chose Colin Spence to do it. And I think it's worked well. And I think that the same process can work well in the fire department and would be the most effective way to allow the chief and the future chiefs to govern that department. Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
Thank you. Does the Finance Committee have a recommendation?
The Finance Committee unanimously recommends approval of Article 20.
Select Board have a recommendation.
The majority of the Select Board did not support Article 20, with 1 in favor, 3 against, and 1 abstention.
Anyone have any questions or discussion?
Sheila Pichette, Precinct 10. As I'm sure that everybody in this room appreciates the total communication between the fire safety, the police, and all of the other public safety entities in the town, I would like to ask if it's possible for the police chief to give his opinion on this or some insight to help us make our decision.
So that's a question.
Yes.
Chief Spinney?
Good evening, Jim Spinney, Police Chief. I think it's ironic that I'm speaking and the Fire Chief isn't, but I was asked a question. I wasn't preparing to speak, but the question's a valid one. Like the town manager said, in 2003, the Deputy Chief of the Police Department was removed from civil service. And it was removed for the same philosophy as the Police Chief was removed. It's a critical executive level function and position that is obviously has huge impacts on the operations of the police department as well as the community as a whole. And the thinking behind those removals are the significant impact to the community, and oftentimes that selection of those positions requires a far more comprehensive evaluation and assessment beyond that a written test or even a assessment center could provide with one day of testing. I have had the unique opportunity to have watched deputy chiefs be appointed while I was at different ranks of the police department. Like the town manager mentioned, I watched Jimmy Murphy selected as deputy by then Chief Ray McCusker. Jimmy Murphy went on to be, in my opinion, an excellent deputy chief. He, as you're all well aware, became chief, and in my opinion was an excellent chief and leader. I also have the perspective of being selected deputy chief by Jimmy Murphy, then Chief Murphy. I was a lieutenant, and he selected me as his deputy based on, and this is coming from him, my tenure through all the different levels of the police department. And he made an evaluation of my performance through those years and selected me as deputy. And obviously I became chief, and I'll let history judge whether or not I was a good selection as his deputy. Obviously, I've since ascended to the role of chief, and I've had the opportunity, as the town manager already stated, I've chosen 2 deputy chiefs, Dan Ahern and Colin Spence. And I've based those selections on a whole variety of factors over their entire careers, because I've worked with both these gentlemen for the better part of 2 decades. And I based my selection on deputy chief on job performance, training, communication skills, personality traits, disciplinary issues, if any, dealing with the public, dealing with other town departments, and overall experience. And another important aspect that oftentimes cannot be articulated in a testing environment are leadership skills. So, again, my experience has been with the police department only. I'm not trying to cast anything on any other departments. I can only tell you that my perspective is, when looking at all those attributes over many, many years of working with these fellow officers, that's how I came to the decision of my deputy chief. Again, some of these things are difficult to be measured in a testing environment. Some people don't test well. That doesn't mean they're not a good, that doesn't mean they wouldn't be a good leader. And just the reverse is true. You can be an excellent test taker and not be a good leader. And these positions are critical. The deputy chief does not automatically become the chief, but it's fair to say the deputy chief is critical to the chief. On my absence, I expect the deputy chief to perform my role 100%. So that choice is just as important as the chief. It also has to be the proper fit for the community. The town manager chooses the chief based on a lot of criteria, some of it testing, some of it the factors that I went over, supported by the select board. If I'm a good test taker, but I don't have the same philosophy as the town, I'm not going to be a very effective chief to the community. Same goes with the deputy. In my opinion, the deputy and the chief are basically one. It's a team. So that's been my experience with the police department. And again, all my perspectives are it's worked very well.
Thank you.
Thank you for your thorough explanation, Chief Spinney, and thank you for all your work.
Thank you.
Tom Amaro, Precinct 5A. I'm kind of a newbie at this and a little nervous, but, and I didn't know much about civil service until I saw this. And I mean, the whole purpose of it is to ensure public safety, and it seems like a resource we should be taking advantage of. And I don't know what's changed. I mean, it's been working for the deputy fire chief over all these years. And part of the purpose is to avoid the potential for cronyism patronage, nepotism. The exam process is somewhat impartial and achievement-based. You could end up with a deputy chief that can't pass the civil service exam. I mean, maybe they'd still do a great job, as the police chief has expressed. But it has a negative effect on the people that work for them. And yeah, I noticed that the rank and file are not in favor of this, and I'm sure some of them are going to speak. But as a person who has nothing to do with either department, I'm just speaking as a citizen. So one of the reasons I saw in what I was reading on this was that the reason for doing it is to make sure that the chief and the deputy get along, or how was it put? You want to make sure that the deputy is compatible with the chief. You know, I think that's kind of weak. And I really don't understand why civil service would be good for everybody but the ones at the top. They're different, you know, and it doesn't really pertain to them. So I'm just arguing that we should not vote in favor of this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Josh Abbott, 222 Dalton Road, Vice President, Chelmsford Firefighters, Local 1839. Mr. Moderator, through you, I'd like to ask a question of the Select Board. I'd like to poll them how they voted and why.
Yes.
Should I start?
I have to pass the microphone. I'll start and then we'll pass the microphone. So I voted against this article. One of my concerns was that we seem to be getting new information at every discussion. I appreciate the fact that this is a management and a leadership position. It is my understanding that it's not just based on test alone, and that the municipality has an option to take advantage of the assessment centers that are already in place and to weight the assessment and the testing the way that they want to. The issue of captains not signing up, my understanding happened a year ago, a little over a year ago, and I am not seeing why this is an urgent thing to address all of a sudden, and why we didn't start to address that issue when it occurred. My understanding is that for whatever reason, Chelmsford was not part of the signups, the regular signups for the testing during that time period, which is like a month-long period. And so we got a secondary sign-up allocated to us for like a week after the regular period ended. And, you know, it's hard to say what happened and why only 3 captains signed up at that point when they had a week's time frame and didn't know that they would be able to prepare for or had the heads up that they would prepare for the test. So my feeling, the reason I voted no is I'm not satisfied that we've actually worked the system and worked with the workforce to understand who wants to be promoted into that deputy position and to take the time to help prepare our workforce for that. And so I appreciate, I think either way will work, quite frankly. I just couldn't get comfortable with the rationale of why now and why it was urgent now and why we seem to be getting new information at every discussion we had. So I felt that it needed more time, or we needed to go work with the workforce themselves more.
Good evening. George Dixon. I voted against this article, and I think it's the right thing to do. I think it's the fairest thing for everybody involved. I think it's the fairest thing for the town. Keep cronyism out of it. And that's fair enough for me. That's enough for me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, Ken LaFave. So the night we took the vote, I think as I was thinking about this, it had come up sort of fast. We didn't have a lot of background data. We hadn't heard from Chief Spinney as he did tonight, and I think we were still looking for more information, and so that was my opinion at the time for voting no. And tonight is probably going to be a harder vote for me because since that time, I had been reached out by some captains from the Chelmsford Fire Department, and who said that it was probably not the best idea to keep the civil service exam. And I was contacted by outside firefighters from outside Chelmsford who reached out to me. They were just regular firefighters who said that, in their opinion, it's something Chelmsford considered to do away with the civil service. And when I asked the 5 people who reached out to me why they said that, their concern was having a firefighter who had only been on duty for 2 or 3 years, scoring well on the exam in a situation like in Chelmsford and being promoted above someone that maybe like a captain who was above them. So I'm sort of at a crossroad tonight on where I was voting, to be honest, because of the input that came in after that vote. But at the time, I voted against this.
Good evening, Mark Carrata. I abstained, and the reason that I abstained from voting on this is because I felt as though there were good arguments on both sides of this equation. I think we've heard that from the other speakers, at least 2. But at any rate, my thought was to further investigate, and I was starting to reach out to some folks that I know that are friends, that are firefighters, and a chief in another town, who had actually, they had removed that as a civil service position, and I wanted to really research it a little bit more. Without having time or the knowledge, I thought my best vote was to abstain.
Pat Wojcik, I was the one who voted in favor of this article. I agree with some of the points that have been made by the presenters, that I think it's important that the fire chief and deputy fire chief share the same values and the goals that they have for the department going forward. And I think the best way to do that is to make this, what I consider to be an administrative change in the way that position is hired. As has been mentioned, it does not apply to the firefighters. It's the initial firefighter when they're hired. That would still be under civil service. So I feel that is the best way to go forward with the fulfilling of these positions. Thanks.
Start the clock. Our current civil service system was adopted by vote of this very body on March 7th, 1966. Tonight you are being asked to consider the removal of one position from civil service for the Chelmsford Fire Department. Since 1970, when the first deputy fire chief was appointed from a competitive open civil service examination, the Chelmsford Fire Department has been well served by 7 civil service deputy fire chiefs, some of which served in a provisional status, something that is afforded to the town by civil service law in the event that there is an opening and there is no list. This process of testing is an in-depth one and something that bears discussion. For an individual to take the test, roughly $1,000 worth of study materials, hundreds of hours of studying, and a very difficult written examination, as well as your professional education and experience, are all taken into account for your score, and is currently the process for Chelmsford. Other options are available within civil service, such as incorporating an assessment center or sole assessment center, something that has not been explored by town management to our knowledge. Members are placed on an eligible list for a 2-year period. Our current promotional costs our current promotional process costs the town of Chelmsford nothing. Over 100 full-time fire departments throughout the state fall under the umbrella of civil service. 80 of those departments utilize civil service to promote deputy fire chiefs. Not all of the other departments may have the rank of deputy fire chief within their department, so keep that in mind. Chelmsford is not unique. Civil service is designed to be fair and unbiased. In a meeting earlier in this process, the fire chief stated that there have been multiple tests that have been canceled and we have not had an eligible list. This is true. Look what I've just told you.
That 1 minute, sir.
With the amount of money, time, and effort needed and no expected opening, it is a big ask for a member to devote the kind of time and effort for a job that may not be open. We had 2 deputy chiefs in Chelmsford until 2015, at which time 1 position was eliminated. Now we only have 1. These positions do not open regularly. Many deputy fire chiefs have served under multiple fire chiefs in Chelmsford without issue. If the need for an appointment were to arise, a provisional appointment could be made and a test called for. They are held annually. Civil service just underwent a rigorous special legislation commission that was made up of 29 appointees, spanning from labor groups, fire and police unions, management groups, chief associations, Mass Municipal Association, House and Senate members, veterans groups, and other stakeholders, something that has not occurred in the town of Chelmsford with this issue. They found that civil service is strong and holds up to its merits. The big issue was underfunding at the state level. $4 million was just added to civil service at the state level, and something that rarely happens, user fees, which made up the majority of the civil service budget, were cut. Promotional exams dropped from $250 to $150 this year. Local 1839 asks that you vote against this article. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Michael Young, Precinct 11, 15 Janet Road. I had a question for the town manager. I was wondering who called for this article to come into fruition and why?
Through you, Mr. Moderator. As indicated in the motion, I sponsored the article on the warrant. I consulted with the fire chief prior to putting it on the warrant. And as I said at the town meeting information session last Wednesday, this matter was brought to my attention by the current deputy fire chief, who suggested that I might want to consider this. I took his advice.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator.
All right. I'm here to speak against this article. You can start the clock.
I did, thank you.
Yeah. So Mass General Law, Chapter 31. There are currently 23 of the 58 uniformed Chelmsford firefighters that are military veterans, some who are disabled veterans. These veterans receive protections under this law. If a member is chosen as the next deputy fire chief and they happen to be a reservist, they do not have to fear that their job will be not be there for them when they come back from a deployment or a drill. As was the case with myself when I was called up for my deployment in Iraq in 2006. There's all of the other things on my mind. I did not have to take a moment to consider that I would not be coming back to my job when I came back home. I knew my job would be here, my rank and my seniority would not be affected. Switching from civil service will not provide the same protections. Without them in place, a member considering this position might opt out of applying for fear of losing the protections the current position defends. The town has not provided an alternative approach because promises are not the law. Nothing has been discussed with the members. I'm not suggesting every decision the department or town makes should be run by the local. However, a decision of this magnitude certainly should have. As an Army veteran, I oppose this change from civil service. We also got a letter from the American Legion supporting our vote no on this article, and I would urge you to vote no on Article 20.
Thank you.
Good evening. Rob Albon, 1 Driftwood Drive. Mr. Moderator, if you would entertain me, I'd like to poll the Finance Committee and ask him this question. What financial impact did you determine to be the reason why you voted to support this warrant article?
When we discussed and we reviewed this article, we were presented both with the position of the town, also the fire chief, and a member of your union came and spoke to us as well. Much documentation was provided to us to review. The financial impact is in the ability for the department to run effectively. Our concern was that the process works and is proven to work in the police department. We have a desire for the selection of the deputy chief to be done the same way. There's been numerous discussions about succession planning. That was also reviewed and discussed at our meeting. And the need for the selection to be compatible with the chief that's currently running the department was one of our concerns.
So you didn't consider any financial impact? I didn't hear any of what you were saying in regards to the financial impact. In other words, did the Finance Committee take in consideration the cost of the town if we were to remove civil service in the process going forward?
Here, I'll speak to that. Like, I can tell you how I looked at it. I manage very large staffs of accountants, and I've been doing this for about 25 years. And I can tell you, when I look at it, I can have a staff accountant who is a superstar. However, moving them up to a management position, they can do everything right, absolutely everything right. Their performance is above average. However, they may not be management material. And putting that position, hiring someone, moving that position just because they do their current job really well, and I put them into a management position, will cost the company significant amount of money because you have the wrong person in that job. It is not just about how well they do on a test. When you look at management positions and running and as someone moves up the ladder, whether that manager should be a controller or an assistant controller or the head of accounting, there's costs, and there are costs of what happens if you put the wrong person in there. And they can score the highest score on the CPA exam. It doesn't necessarily mean they're the best manager and the best leader for that company. So that's how I evaluated the financial impact to this town.
I agree with the previous two speakers. I too manage a number of people and have for a long time. And there are the costs that you don't necessarily see in hiring the wrong people. And taking a test and doing well on that test, to the previous speaker's point, does not necessarily make a good manager. And the opposite is true. And I think there's a level of fairness that needs to go along as well between the fire chief and the chief of police.
Thank you.
Sam Chase. I really can't add much more to what the three folks on the committee have said, and also echo a lot of the sentiments that were expressed by the chief of police. If this were a private sector situation, this wouldn't even be a discussion. The ability of the first in command to pick the second in command should, good management practice and procedure, for all the reasons that you've just heard here, and those also expressed by the chief of police, dictates that that person should have fairly free rein on the selection of a deputy.
Thank you.
Again, I don't want to be too repetitive. I come out of a management background running plants, and I would just say that I really believe the guy who's running is the head needs to have the choice of who his partner is going to be in running the organization. The other thing in making my decision is I don't, because we would eliminate or say the position no longer requires the test, doesn't mean someone couldn't be chosen from that. It's not precluding anybody from being chosen out of the fire department. And I would think any decision that didn't come out of the fire department would clearly
need, very strong explanation of why that was made. So I don't see the risk.
Thank you. You can stop the clock, Mr. Moderator. Whenever the town decides to unilaterally change a practice that has worked successfully for well over 50 years, serious consideration must be given as to why it should be changed and what effects that change will bring. The Chelmsford Fire Department has been utilizing this statewide standardized system of testing to hire and promote firefighters for over 50 years. There are many arguments for the removal of civil service system in Chelmsford, but often they're misleading. Town management claims they want parity with the police department, but they cherry pick which aspects they want parity with. How come when parity is discussed with the police department, it is never discussed the need for improved span of control with additional supervisory positions within the fire department? Is parity with the police department only convenient when it doesn't involve firefighter safety? Town management also claims the need for the fire chief to pick the next person that works best for him or her. We argue that the best person for the job should be the person who will work best for the residents of the community they serve. Town management also claims that they are succession planning for the future. If that were the case, why don't we have a plan in place before we decide to unilaterally change a process that 80% of eligible municipalities use? The truth is, there is no plan. The plan has changed 3 times since it was brought forth in August. First, it was an assessment aspect to a promotional process. Next, it was a promotional panel made up of individuals hand-selected by town management. Finally, the most recent was a hand-picked appointment by the fire chief, approved by the town manager. Again, there is no plan. The stakeholders, which are the men and women of the Chelmsford Fire Department, are yet to be approached about this. The Department of Labor Relations has case law stating that any change to the promotional process is a mandatory subject of collective bargaining. The town just went through the DLR in regard to another public safety union in town. Are we prepared to go down that road again? There are many arguments to keep this position in civil service, but most importantly, it keeps...
1 minute, sir.
But most importantly, it keeps the fire department apolitical. Having a deputy fire chief that is a political appointment could potentially create a situation where decisions are based on the best interests of politics instead of the best interests of public safety. Civil service provides continuity and consistency that is needed in key levels of public safety. We cannot afford to have these positions potentially change every time there is a new administration at town hall or if there is a new fire chief, as the current fire chief operates without a contract. This is the key to the success of any long-term complex industry such as public safety. In closing, civil service ensures that the civil servant's loyalty is given to the public they serve rather than the politicians in power. That is why we are asking town meeting to keep politics out of public safety and vote no on this warrant article. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joanne Anderson, Precinct 6. You can start the clock. I don't ever get up and speak, so you'll have to excuse my anxiety here. I am not affiliated with the police or the fire department or anybody else. I am a nurse. And as a nurse, you take a test to become a nurse, and then every 2 years, you're required to do CEUs to continue with your license. I sometimes wonder if I had to take that test every 2 years, would I pass it? I don't know. I've been a nurse for 30-something years, and I don't know if I would pass the test. 80% of the towns use civil service, so there's got to be a reason why they feel it's a good fit. And I do feel that I absolutely am going to vote no on this because I don't think this is a change that we should make right now. I did ask, I looked online, there are 500 people on the list to become firefighters for the town of Chelmsford. There's only 1 person above that point. I asked somebody why there's nobody else. Why isn't there anybody waiting to be the deputy fire chief? And the reason I was told was because of the testing and the amount of money that it takes to do it, although it has been decreased by the sounds of it, and the amount of time it takes to pass it, and the fact that it's only good for 2 years, and you have no idea when the deputy fire chief will retire, and that person has to continue to take that test every 2 years if they would like to be the next deputy fire chief. So I don't blame the people below deputy fire chief for not wanting to take that test every 2 years. Why spend that money? Take it when you know the deputy fire chief is getting ready to retire, and then you probably would have the majority of captains take the test. So I just feel at this point that there shouldn't be a change, and this is getting worse instead of better, shouldn't be a change in how we do things, and we should continue to do things the way the other 80% of Massachusetts does civil service. So I would encourage people to vote no, and if you haven't looked at the letter that came out tonight, I would certainly look at it, because that just made me even feel that way stronger. Thank you.
Thank you.
Brian Latina, Precinct 9. My first question was regarding the Finance Committee's unanimous vote to support this change. Make it work.
Specifically, they already answered one question.
Right. I'm waiting for the sound system to settle down.
Step on the mat. That may help. I don't know.
Made it worse. I'll do it, though, for you.
Well,
Okay, so
apparently it doesn't work. I'm just listening to the telemedia people.
it's still whining. It seems like it's gotten worse, not better. Okay.
Take this off, take this off.
Doubtful. Okay. In any event,
Just speak up and you'll be...
the Finance Committee didn't seem to give us a financial reason for voting unanimously. That's concerning to me as town meeting rep. That is the function they have. I didn't hear savings. I didn't hear an expense. So that's a little concerning to me. Secondarily, this kind of came up quickly, just post-pandemic. We're losing employees all over the state and the country right now. We're about to, according to Bloomberg, the financial news today, we're in a recession, and next year will be a recession. I'd be afraid that we might hinder our ability to keep some of our employees with regard to civil service. This has been a tried and true system for many years, and 50 in our case. Why do we need to make a decision right now, tonight, this year? Is it critical? Is there a critical time path? I haven't heard that at all. It was kind of magic. It came along. Boom, here we are. So I'm going to vote no on this one, Mr. Moderator. And I'm looking at it and saying it can come back next year if this really was a problem. But I was very much moved by the civil service comment about our former military and current military reservists possibly looking at it and saying, gosh, I'm going to go do something else. I won't stay like our chief has stayed many years. We've heard that. With the possibility of working their way up the ladder. Civil service protects us, it protects our finances, and I think it protects the job that these folks do. They can't strike. They're not, union folks aren't allowed to strike. So in order to move up the career path, they need to have some kind of structure that they can trust that isn't related to politics. And the politics in our country right now are pretty tough. I can only imagine what it would be like if we do this to each one of our civil service functions that we hope the government is running at a real good clip. So I'm going to say no to this one tonight. They need to come back next year and tell us why this makes sense to me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Pete Padula from Chelmsford Telemedia, just cutting the line. If you can stand close to the mic, Brian was very far away, which means we get a lot of feedback. As you can see, I'm talking close to the mic. It is a little bit better, and I know it's a little tricky. It's a tough room, very echoey, but just adjust the mic so that it's near your mouth and just speak closely, and I think we'll be okay. If you can hear me okay, you'll be okay, because I don't have a very loud voice. Thanks.
Will Wagner, Precinct 8. I have a couple questions, and then I'll get into some debate. My first question is for the fire chief. I find it interesting that we have gone through this many speakers without hearing from him. So I would like to hear the fire chief's opinion on this.
Thank you.
Thank you for the invitation, and good evening, Mr. Moderator, board members, and town meeting reps, and thank you for your consideration of this article. Thank you. So just a little bit of history. Civil service falls under the state's Human Resource Division. Massachusetts brought in civil service in 1884. Town of Chelmsford came out of the civil service on August 8th, 1975. So we've been under civil service for 47 years, not over 50, 47 years. So currently, as the town manager mentioned, civil service covers all positions outside of the chief's position. It covers the entrance test to become a firefighter, which is every year now, which we have to schedule. And it covers the promotional exams, as the manager mentioned, for captain and deputy chief. The deputy chief position within the town of Chelmsford is the second ranking position. This individual is responsible for overseeing the operations of the department and training, and acts as a partner, a close partner with me in developing the operating budget and the capital plan. It's a very demanding position, one that must be available 24/7. If there's a major fire, a major event, problem with apparatus, this individual must be available to respond at all hours of the day. This individual works pretty much every day. Yesterday, working at the Bay State Marathon, for instance. Like the manager mentioned, the current process right now is that our captains can elect to sign up and take the promotional exam. And the top scorer will become the next deputy chief under this process. I feel, and if you look at the trends right now, among municipalities, it's to engage in a selection process. And we have discussed what we would like. I would like to have an interview panel. You could have members of the town management team, whether it's the manager or the assistant manager. This is one that I've served on for a couple of communities. Human resource director, your public safety chiefs, whether it'll be myself, the police chief. You will typically have an outside chief that serves on the panel. And I think this affords the town the flexibility to evaluate the candidate, to ask the questions that are most important to the town. I think, as the police chief so eloquently stated, they have promoted 3 deputy chiefs in 9 years, all without civil service. 2013, when it was Jim Spinney was deputy chief. 2014, when he became chief, he appointed Dan Ahern, and again in just recently, 2022, with Deputy Chief Colin Spence. I think if you take a look around the room, we have a town clerk who recently, through succession planning, and this is how we got on this topic, myself, the manager, and the deputy chief, looking at our future and how best to fill this position. Who better to know this position than somebody who has served in that role? You have a town clerk who has picked an assistant town clerk, a very good assistant town clerk. You have an accountant who recently has picked an assistant accountant. We have a health director, Sue Rosa, who has recently selected a deputy health director. We have a facilities director. Right after the vote that the select members took, they voted to appropriate funding through ARPA to allow the town to engage in a process to hire the next assistant facilities director, with the hope that this person can transition to the next facilities director, all without a test. Okay. And I just want to clarify some information. I did take part in a civil service study last year among many chiefs, not just fire chiefs, but police chiefs. And I think the number one complaint among the chiefs is the lack of flexibility. Number one, yes, we are bound pretty much to take the number one top scoring candidate. Number two, we do not have the ability to schedule our tests. We just recently had a test that was scheduled because we didn't have enough members. I called civil service and asked them, why can't we schedule it? Why can't we go with just the 3? Their reply to me, well, maybe if they got somebody else to sign up, pay for the exam, even if they don't take the exam, we would have held it. That is not sufficient in my opinion. As far as free, yes, the written test, members do have to pay for the test. The cost is coming down, but if we do engage an assessment center, there is a cost. And what civil services tell me, it's $5,000, a minimum. Currently, of the 351 communities in Massachusetts, 39 cities and 312 towns, there are 367 fire departments, that protect our 351 municipalities. Out of those, now you can say, why 367? You have Massport, which protects Logan, Hanscom in the Worcester Airport, Joint Base, which protects Camp Edwards at Cape Cod, Westfield Fire Department, which protects out in Westfield. South Hadley has 2 distinct fire departments within its town, 3 Rivers Fire Department in Hampton. Bottom line, you have 102 fire departments right now covered under civil service. That's 28%, not 80%, 28%. You do have 80 deputy chiefs. Now remember, the deputy chief is the second-ranking officer in Chelmsford. Some departments have an assistant chief. The city of Lowell, the 5th largest municipality in Massachusetts, is going through the process right now to put in an assistant chief outside of civil service. Outside of civil service. Of the 80 deputy chiefs, that represents 21.8% of the 166 departments. So the common discussion will be, well, yes, these 80 deputy chiefs represent the more popular departments, and that is correct. But there are communities larger than Chelmsford that are not covered by civil service. Barnstable, 49,000. Marlborough, 41,000. Amherst, 39,000. Shrewsbury, 38. Braintree, 38. As part of my discussion and participation in the civil service study process last year, the lack of flexibility, what is the trend? There are departments that are leaving. There's a reason they're bringing the cost down. The chiefs stated their opinion that civil service does not help them, does not allow them, and this is not our fight, we're only trying to get the deputy chief out, but there are departments that are pulling out of civil service altogether. For instance, Acushnet pulled out of civil service in 2019. Franklin pulled out of civil service in 2020. Mansfield, 2021. Marlborough, 2017. Plainville, 2018. Swampscott recently pulled out in 2021. And then there are other departments that are in the process as we speak. Webster, Norwood, Millbury, Belmont, Needham, looking to pull out of civil service. Again, we're not looking to pull out completely of civil service. We're just looking to take this position, the deputy chief's position that we've discussed through succession planning, to pull this important position out so that I may have the opportunity that the town clerk had, that I may have the opportunity that the town accountant had, that I may have the opportunity that the health director, Sue Rosa, had, and that I might have the opportunity that the DPW is going through right now to select their next assistant facilities director. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief.
Thank you.
My next question is for the town council. A previous speaker indicated that they believe that if this was pulled out, that the town could face a suit from the firefighters, that they weren't consulted ahead of time. Is that an accurate statement?
Mr. Moderator, through you to the previous speaker, I mean, any entity can file a suit pretty much at any time. Just the cost of the civil cost of filing the suit. I don't really have an opinion as to whether or not the likelihood of such suit would be successful at this point.
Thank you. You can start the clock. So several previous speakers have made a whole bunch of statements. First of all, there was one previous speaker who indicated that this seemed to come out of nowhere. I believe the fire chief has just indicated that it did not come out of nowhere. It was discussed amongst town leadership, and it was brought to fall town meeting appropriately with the warrant article filed appropriately. Another speaker indicated that the test proves that they have the knowledge and requirements to fulfill the position. As a project manager for the last 25 years and a certified project manager who had to pay thousands of dollars for my education, specifically in project management, hundreds of dollars for the exam itself, plus thousands of hours of documented experience and training, I can say quite honestly that taking a test does not qualify you for any position. I have worked with project managers, both good and bad, who all have certifications, and the certification itself didn't mean anything. So I truly urge people to vote for this. I believe that our town leadership, as the fire chief has discussed, has thought this through, and every other department in the town works with the appointment. Finally, the suggestion that this reduces cronyism or political positioning seems misguided in my opinion, because per the next slide, I believe it was, the appointment would have to be discussed between the chief and the town manager and then brought to the select board for approval. Therefore, it's not a singular appointment, it's just a discussion of who needs to, or who would fill the position best in their opinion.
1 minute.
That completes my statement. Please vote for this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Glenn Thorne, Precinct 7, you may start the clock, and don't tell me when a minute's left, because I'm watching the clock too.
Okay.
Thank you. This is a very straightforward question. Is the people on the Finance Committee individually related to you? This is not a question that's very complex. It's a question about leadership. Every one of the members of the Finance Committee said, yes, there's an expense that occurs when you have incompatible leadership, especially in a town like ours. If you have, a chief going one way, a deputy chief going the other way, there could be problems that lead to financial consequences. Now, I want you each to think about organizations that you have been in. And there have been good leaders and there have been bad leaders, but Chelmsford has generally chosen very good leaders for the chief position in the fire department, and as Chief Spinney told you, in the progress through the police department. So we have a history of picking good leaders. And the question I want you to ask yourself is, if in an organization, the smartest person in that organization was made the head of the organization, would that be the right choice? Because in the community that we live in, there's a lot of smart people from some very difficult universities that I would never put in a leadership position. They're smart, smarter than I am, but they don't know how to lead a team. And you're looking to have a major problem if you decide who should lead a team based on a test score. So while test scores are important, certainly to show the qualifications of people that are entering a particular profession, like a firefighter or police or what have you, when it comes to the management team needs to be compatible. They need to be able to work together with each other, especially when there's only two of them. They replace each other at different events and different requirements. Like the police chief Spinney said, it's him when he's not here. And as Fire Chief Ryan said, the deputy chief would replace him if he were not there. So the question we have here is fairly simple. Now, do you want a person who is carefully selected and compatible with the head of the organization, fire or police, in this case fire, or do you want the person that scores the highest test score? And I've run large organizations, and there have been some incredibly smart people that really don't have the set of skills, the many items that Police Chief Spinney referred to, in order to adequately run that organization. I urge you to support this because it gives the flexibility, the ability to select based on a large number of factors who the number 2 person is. And that's the right way to run an organization. Not the person that scores the highest, but the person that is capable and best fits the organization.
Thank you.
Mr. Moderator, Badri Uplepan, Precinct 11. I have a couple of questions. I don't know who can answer this, but maybe it's town manager or the police chief or the fire chief. There was a comment by a previous speaker that eliminating the position would cause a loss of protection for if there was an act, a veteran or a reservist who would go on to do something else. Is that a true statement, or is there something that maybe is a true statement? Could you please confirm that that protection would not exist for such a candidate or such a person, number one? Or is there a mechanism to introduce such a protection if indeed there were no protection?
Through you, Mr. Moderator, I believe under state law, you cannot lose your position as a result of military service. And I don't know how anybody in good conscience could do that to somebody, even if you could.
Thank you very much. I'd like to ask the next question both to the police chief as well as to the fire chief, just for my understanding of the process and how officer development takes place. Specifically, maybe we'll start with the fire chief. Thank you. Do you have a list of, in the development process of the fire captains or other people, if there is a list of leadership attributes, experiences, do you go through an annual review, written review process, opportunities to sort of train them in certain of the soft qualities as we speak? Is it listed? Is the regular feedback given to individual fire captains or the appropriate levels to get to that next level and gain the experience that they would
So
have?
if I understand the question correctly, if you're looking at attributes, and I think I referred to in previous command staff meetings, I think it was Forbes that did a survey among business leaders asking the most important attributes of leadership. Generally, you'll see knowledgeable, smart, fair, balanced. But one that I point out to my members, my officers, is accountability, hardworking, and responsiveness, specifically for this role. The ability, and I don't know anybody better than Deputy Chief Donahue, that really epitomizes that trait, dedication, and responsiveness. And truly, when I say you're 24/7, your phone rings at 2 in the morning, doesn't have to be a fire, doesn't have to be a major event, but there's a problem with the truck. You have to be available. And sometimes you have to be available to come in and cover. So yes, those traits are brought up. So in terms of traits, those are discussed.
But are they the next level given opportunities to exercise those or exhibit or train for those? Are the stretch assignments, if there is a way to do that? I'm just asking, how do people get? Because the reason I asked this question is there was a comment made for somebody from the finance committee that if this was the private organization, this would not be an issue. But even in a private organization, if people see that there is no opportunity to exercise or get to that, they're out of that place.
So through the town succession planning, they have engaged the Collins Center through UMass Boston, and one of the things is leadership training. So we have entered our members into that. So we didn't make the first round because they were limited to so many, but we're seeking a public safety training for our leaders, both police and fire, for that very reason.
And so everyone will be given
those
who are interested.
Yes, they will have an opportunity to participate, but discussing this with the human resource director for the town, we thought it would be more appropriate to maybe have a public safety because they do exercises and they both have to work together.
Sure.
We figured that might be the most appropriate venue for that.
Thank you on that. You also discussed the statistics around other towns and cities in Massachusetts pulling out of civil service for this position specifically, or the challenges around this.
Yes.
Could you comment on, if possible, publicly known data on the selection process of the deputy candidate, whether it's by panels or is it by just the direct assessment of the fire chief? Can you give some statistic breakdown on?
I don't have exact. So I did reach out. So I'm a member of the Fire Chiefs Association. I did reach out. I did hear from some. when they were asking like what the process. Weston, I think, is a good example where they start the process for this role now, the deputy chief, with a interview panel. Then they bring in an assessment center. And then the town will make a determination with the fire chief and the members of the interview panel, they will, aggregate the scores between the interview panel, the questions that were asked, and the assessment center. So, but there are different municipalities that will go strictly with an assessment center. I've served on boards that strictly go with just an interview panel. But from the feedback I've gotten, it varies. But I think a combination, a hybrid, would probably be more appropriate in this situation.
Okay, thanks on that. Do you think that this would be something that, it's always not easily right about, everything cannot be written, but is there something that will be written, documented, as this is going to be the process of selection of somebody new? Would this be documented as part of, if this motion were to pass tonight, would you have something written as a standard operating procedure of how the next selection process will go? Sort of general guidelines for the next level?
I think I could tell you my preference. I can't speak for a future chief. I can't
Absolutely.
speak for a future town manager.
Absolutely.
But I certainly think the feedback that I got participating in that civil service reform study last year, hearing the feedback from chiefs from both police and fire, flexibility was something that they were seeking, and they have afforded towns a little more flexibility civil service-wise with an assessment center. Yet, again, you're still stuck with that number one person. I know from the chiefs that were participating, it seemed like the consensus having an interview panel, maybe coupled with an assessment center, seemed like the right approach to go forward. And I think it's a sensible approach.
Thank you. My next question would be to town manager or to the police chief, echoing a similar question. Maybe the police chief, if they can answer, did the police chief also use such a process to select the deputy chief of police in the past, or the last selected person? If you would comment on that, and then I'll go to the town manager.
I was selected deputy chief after having a one-on-one interview with then Chief Murphy. He made the choice from the existing lieutenants at the time, of which the rank I held. I selected my deputy chief, both of them, one-on-one interview. And again, that was based on 2 decades of observation and evaluation and assessment.
Okay, thank you very much. Town manager, this is the last question here, just to make sure that the different departments that were quoted during the conversation are covered in some sense. Do we have a similar written policy or expectation to have some sort of written policy on how deputy chiefs that are being selected and trained as potential succession planning? Is there an operation philosophy within town management now that you and select board are coming together to figure out what needs to happen in this space?
No, for public safety, we have what's known as a strong fire chief and a strong police chief under state law. They choose the individuals. All I have is a confirming authority. I do not have the authority to set policy for the police or fire department.
Okay, but for the other departments that are there, just as an equation, they talk about the facilities director, assistant facilities director, and others. Do you have sort of similar policy, or is it just dependent on the whatever?
Basically, I lean towards the department head, and then they've got to present the case to me for how they choose their assistant, but there's no formal policy. But, so that's how it stands.
Okay, thank you very much.
If I could just add one thing that I just want to jump on. So as far as the town manager will send down training opportunities, one pretty big issue now with the changes in escalation of prices is procurement. So it's a process where you can get into trouble very quickly if you don't know what you're doing. So we are engaging in that training with the deputy chief. But that's usually a discussion that the manager will pass down training opportunities to his department heads. I will have discussions with my staff, and then we will kind of jointly work on those goals. And that's just one that comes to mind that I think is a kind of a pending issue that a lot of people are facing right now, especially with the escalation of prices, and then, in trying to navigate yourself through a very difficult procurement process in the state of Massachusetts.
Thank you. With that, maybe we can start the clock. I'm not going to debate this necessarily, but one suggestion may be that given there has been concern around the selection process, maybe there can be a documented selection process that's a little bit more open if this motion does pass through, so that the members of the staff of the various departments, whether it be the police or the fire at this particular point, but maybe in the future for other departments too, it becomes a little bit more open as to how to rise up the ranks if that was the choice of the individual to get there, because that is also practiced now much more in the private sector, where the chiefs got to pick, but they haven't always picked. We are lucky and blessed. Chelmsford has had good chiefs who have been able to pick the right people, but maybe just documenting it allows for people to have their concerns as which that there is openness and clarity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Joe Reddy, Precinct 8. Through you to the town manager, I guess. Is the main purpose of this article for succession planning?
It's a purpose, not the main purpose. In my mind, as I said during my presentation, I think the main purpose is that the public safety chief, in this case the fire chief, should have the ability to choose the person who can help him administer the department to best serve the community. That, in my mind, is the core essence of this. There are other benefits, such as succession planning, but I want to assure this, and I said this at the information session last Wednesday and other opportunities, by no means is the person who's chosen as the deputy chief, whether it's police or fire, assured to be the next chief of the department. What this, in my mind, is the deputy chief is chosen to be the best person chosen by the chief to help him or her operate the department in an administrative capacity.
Okay. I mean, I've heard that, ultimately this would be good because they could choose the next deputy chief, because ultimately no different than other departments. One of them was DPW that was mentioned, but I look at the fact that we got an excellent selection in Christine Clancy that was picked, and she wasn't the assistant DPW director. She came and took Gary Persichetti's seat. I remember Ornerina being a great town clerk. I don't remember her being, in the system prior to that. So you definitely can go outside of the system. Is that true? You don't have to select a fire chief from the ranks, right?
I think as the town has shown in the fire department, most of you are familiar with Chief Parrow. Chief Parrow was an outside person who was brought in to be the chief of the department, and therefore none of the deputy chiefs was chosen at that time to be the fire chief.
Okay. I would urge everyone to vote no on this, and I think partly because I think it does become a political pick. I think it becomes very uncomfortable for members of the union that, are basically at a bargaining table. They could be looked at negatively as part of doing that process, and I think being part of that selection is something to take into consideration. I like the fact that there's a veteran preference that's given. I think we've got a lot of people that go overseas and serve our country, and they deserve a little bit of a boost as a result of that. And I'm concerned obviously about the protections that are lost. And I think managing staff that are union are much different than managing your general public sector staff, private sector staff. So, I think there's a lot of things that have to be looked at here before I think we change the status quo. So I urge you to vote no. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, Diane Baxter, Precinct 9. I just have a few thoughts, I guess. First, several previous speakers have talked about the current system being more fair, and it would be, unfair to the firefighters or to the deputy chief ultimately to have to be selected through the new process. But then at the same time, we're hearing that these firefighters have to pay $1,000 and have hundreds of hours of studying in order to even be considered for the position of deputy chief. So to me, that is advantaging people who have a better financial wherewithal at that moment and better time, more time. So if someone's having maybe a family crisis, they have a parent that they're caring for, so they can't devote every weekend and every night to studying, that person no longer can be considered. I mean, the fact that there's none of the people in that rank have signed up for this test tells you how much of a burden it is. So to me, it sounds more like the current system may be unfairly biasing the approach, the whole practice. So I think I would urge people to really think about that. I really don't understand. I heard some people supposedly supporting, or not supposedly, but supporting saying no, but to me, all the arguments said yes. So that's one thing. Also, this keep politics out of it doesn't really ring true to me. Our town manager isn't an elected politician. The fire chief isn't an elected position. So I guess if you're talking about internal department politics, maybe there's some validity there, but I don't think there's a whole lot of politics in it. But maybe I'm naive, I don't know. And then just the final comment, I come from a long history in the private sector. I now work for state government, so I'm getting used to a different process. But I think I can't imagine a single test being able to substitute for interviews and, watching a person. A whole lot of factors goes into making someone a good leader. I can't imagine a single test or a test plus an assessment really being able to identify a good leader. I know a lot of really smart people that I've worked with in the past that were horrible leaders. So I would urge you to vote yes on this.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Like some clarification. Would removing the position from civil service, Town Manager Cohen, would removing the person from civil service remove the veteran's preference?
Yes.
Would removing the person from civil service also remove the residence requirement?
Yes.
Okay. Those to me seem like start the clock, but it'll be real short. Those to me, I consider significant reasons to remain with the civil service system until we can iron out a lot more of the details of the process. I think the proposal is premature for us at this point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, tall. I'll be as quick as I can. We've beaten this one up pretty good. Rod Cleaves, Precinct 10. Mr. Cohen, just a quick question. Two verbs in your first sentence there. I have questions about them specifically. We're authorizing the select board to do something. Does that mean they necessarily will do it?
No.
Okay. And given the fact that as a plurality, the select board doesn't support this, does it necessarily mean that they won't? But do we have any guarantee that if we do submit a petition to the general court, that it will go our way? Well,
we have no assurance.
First off, we have to ask them to submit the petition.
I don't know what the select board would decide to do if the town meeting approves this article this evening. If they would not honor the will of town meeting, that would be for them to say and decide. I also don't know what the legislature would do. I do know there is a history in the legislature of approving home rule petitions along these lines. As was noted earlier, there has been an ongoing Civil Service Reform Commission. That commission has extended its term, so we don't know when that commission is going to finish. I don't know what the legislature is going to do in the short term with petitions like this and others in that period of time. So no, there's no certainty on anything.
Okay, so approving or not approving this tonight, it just puts it back in the hands of the select board.
Well, if you don't approve it, it's not going to the legislature.
Well,
The select board wouldn't have the authority. If,
All right.
if the town meeting were to approve it, then it would put it in the hands of the select board. And then ultimately, if the select board submitted it to the legislature, it would put it in the legislature's hands for an action.
Thank you. I see the clock already started, even though I was only asking.
That's okay.
Sorry. Thank you. I'll be as brief as I can. I spent 47 years of my career, roughly half in private industry and half working for the federal government. And I never got a promotion, nor did I see anybody get a promotion because they took a test. And taking a test doesn't prove any sense of leadership or proper management skills. That's not necessarily saying anything against civil service. I just see the deputy chief position as an administrative position as well as a technical position. We had to get degrees and we had to get certifications to do my job, but when it came time to promote myself or get promoted through the ranks, I had to be compatible and I had to prove my leadership. That's all I'm going to say. You can make up your own mind.
Thank you.
Nancy Arroway, and I might be even shorter. So through through Mr. Moderator to the police chief, question. So we heard tonight that the deputy position is really a partnership position, and that you have to speak with one voice. You really have to be a management team. You talked earlier about evaluating candidates for your deputy position and all of the various factors that you evaluated as you selected a deputy. Could you tell us which of those qualities that you evaluated for a deputy would not be adequately evaluated by a test?
Any one of them, and I think all of them are critical. I took tests to be promoted to sergeant. I took a test to be promoted to lieutenant, which was a combination of assessment center, which was scenario-based testing. Looking at the deputy chief, because it's an executive level position, I think I incorporated all the traits, and I gave them all very important aspects, whether or not that person will be successful. I looked at it as a common sense approach. This is not rocket science. I evaluated people, I looked through their personnel files, I sat down with them, and we had a conversation about what they've done in their career, hitting all those attributes that I talked about earlier.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
To me, this is a management position, and it needs to be evaluated as a management position, not as a technical test. Thank you.
Dave Hadley, Precinct 1. I spent 32 years as a firefighter in the town of Chelmsford. I've worked under the civil service system and under a lot of the leaders that we've had in this town. I think the civil service system has served this town very well, and I think that a lot of the hard work and knowledge, education, studying, and everything that goes into coming up through the ranks of from firefighter up to whatever rank you're going to go to, there's so much to it in a town like this. I would hate to see the town do what we're talking here and give them the ability to, possibly shut out candidates that have spent their whole career serving the town faithfully, and then, to be, vying for that position of deputy, and then get shut out just because someone came from the blue somewhere from out of town or whatever. I just think it would be a real kick to the morale of the department to take this out of the present civil service system and, possibly really change things up in a way that I don't think it needs to. I think civil service has produced some really great leaders in this town, and I think we really should, I think we should not be pushing this through right now. If anything, do further study on it before we push it through, because I think that people within the department could be very negatively affected if we were to do this right now. So I would hope you would vote against. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sam Fulton, Precinct 4. I rise to call the question, but it appears that I don't need to do that.
Thank you. But if anybody else gets up, I'll put you ahead of them, okay, Sam? Okay, so now we're going to be voting on whether or not to remove the deputy fire chief position from civil service. It's close. The article passes. 56 in favor, 55 opposed, 4 abstentions. Okay, it is now almost 10:40.
Mr. Moderator, I rise to request that we adjourn to Thursday night at 7:30, seeing that we have some articles that might require a little more time.
And I do appreciate that, and that's what I was going to talk about. Do I have a second? Second. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Actually, we're going to be adjourning to 7:29 because we have a special town meeting, which will proceed going back to this article. Okay? So see you at 7:29.